section is fighting misinformation through fact-checking and deep fake detection. And here we're going to take a deep dive into best practices for identifying and reporting on misinformation by using fact checks and deepfake detection. And we're joined by two just incredible speakers. I'm so delighted to turn the floor over to them. The first is Gore from factcheck.org. And D'Angelo has been a fact-check reporter since joining the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania in 2007. And prior to his work for the website, D'Angelo was a contributing writer for the Washington Informer, covering local news in Washington, D.C. He's joined by Matt Groh from the MIT Media Lab. Matt is a computational social scientist and PhD candidate in the Effective Computing Group at the MIT Media Lab. His research examines human-AI collaborative decision-making, and he focuses on three areas: misinformation, medical diagnosis, and creative problem-solving. His work is bridging methods from machine learning and social science. And before MIT, Matt co-founded a startup and worked as a data scientist in multiple startups, a nonprofit, World Bank, and DARPA. He has his master's degree in media arts and sciences from MIT and a bachelor's from Middlebury, where he majored in economics and minored in Arabic and mathematics. So really delighted to hear from both of you. And I will turn the floor over to D'Angelo to get us started.
Glad to be here today. Thank you to our host for inviting me to participate. Especially with the midterm elections coming up, I thought it was important for us to be here, factcheck.org, to be represented, to explain some of the work that we do. I wasn't exactly sure how many of you are already doing fact-checking or want to do fact-checking, or if you're familiar with our organization at all. So I thought I would start by explaining a little bit about what we do, who we are, that sort of thing. So factcheck.org was started in 2003, late 2003, by Brooks Jackson, longtime reporter, CNN, Wall Street Journal, Associated Press, and Kathleen Hall Jamieson, who is the director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. She's also a professor of communications. They started in 2003 primarily as a political fact-checking organization. And so the idea at the time was to follow national politicians and the things that they were saying ahead of the 2004 presidential election. And then in subsequent election cycles that turned into us fact-checking the midterm elections, and also branching out sometimes into gubernatorial races, which is usually the most local race that we will cover, just because factcheck.org has always been a small staff. And so we try to focus on national politicians and then politicians at the statewide level. In 2007, we started something called Ask Fact Check, which was our first introduction into writing about viral misinformation, which at the time was mostly information that was being spread through chain emails. So if you go back to our website, you'll see that a lot of the things that we were writing about at that time, which are now spread on social media, were being spread through email at the time. Then in 2015, we started another project that was called SideCheck, which is, it focuses on fact-checking science-based claims that are made by politicians and political organizations, as well as claims that are made on social media posts. And we have a science editor and one other reporter who work on this project. And then in 2016, factcheck.org started partnering with Facebook, which is now known as Meta, for their initiative debunking information spread on their social media platform. So anything on Facebook or Instagram, and I think sometimes information on YouTube as well. And so those are pretty much the three areas that we focus on at factcheck.org. And so I wanted to take the next opportunity to sort of explain what our fact-checking process is for those who may not be familiar with. I think most people are familiar in a way with fact-checking, but maybe not how to go about it. So I figured I might spend some time going through our fact-checking process. And so the first thing that we want to do is we always try to limit fact checks to statements of fact. And we do that because not every statement that somebody makes can be fact checked. One of the issues that we run into sometimes is a lot of people will make opinion-based statements that aren't good for fact checking because they're open to interpretation. And depending on what the person meant, you could take the fact check in a number of different ways. So that's one of the ways we always start out, is to just limit it to an actual fact that can be checked based on actual benchmarks, something that's clear, that you can check for accuracy. Like as I said, you want to try to avoid fact-checking opinions or other vague statements, that could be interpreted in multiple ways. And I think the most basic way to do fact-checking sometimes is if you have a statistic that somebody says, or if there's a piece of legislation that somebody says, they voted for this or they voted against it. Those are things that you can easily check because there should be a voting record. You can check things that people said or they didn't say. If somebody says that they supported a particular proposal at one point in time, and somebody else says they didn't, you could probably go back and check the record of that. And so that's one of the things that we always emphasize. Don't try to fact check everything, just fact check what you can fact check. The other thing I should mention is that these tips are part of our process, which is explained on our website. So if you were to go to factcheck.org and see our fact-checking process, you would see a lot of this there for more information. So the second thing is to make group decisions about rulings and what to fact-check. And so we say have more than one person decide if a claim can be fact-checked or is even worth fact-checking. One of the things that we run into is that sometimes we don't want to amplify minor misstatements or issues that might go under the radar unless you amplify them. And so this is a part of the discussion process that we use to determine what to fact check and to dedicate our resources to. And so we have a staff of, I think, 9 people now. And so everyone pretty much starts their individual day looking for statements that we can check by reviewing transcripts of TV interviews, debates, press releases. Our Facebook team goes through, there's a database that they have access to through Facebook that lists a bunch of claims that they can look into for potentially false or misleading statements. And so once we're going through that review process, everyone, after you do your initial research, you then get together with a group of editors and you discuss the claim that was made, the evidence that you have or have not found to support it, and then you have a discussion about whether or not this is something that we could write about. And at factcheck.org, we focus on false and misleading statements because it's always been a part of our mission to reduce the level of deception and confusion in politics. And so like some other fact-checking organizations do ratings, well, it's true to false, but we primarily focus on the false and misleading because we think it's most important to debunk that information. And so we have a discussion about what to fact check. It usually involves either the reporter or as many as 3 editors sometimes. And then we're making a decision not only about whether or not this is something that we want to fact check, but to what degree, what type of label we would put on it. Is it false? Is it misleading? Is it somewhere in between? Is it out of context? That sort of thing. So those are the discussions that we have. And we do this to make sure that we're confident about the ultimate, the ruling that we give for the claim that we're checking. And it's also important because you don't want to make sure that you're missing anything during the fact-checking or reporting process. Because there are sometimes when you may be doing research on your own and you may think a claim is false, or you may actually think that it's true, but then once you have that discussion amongst the group, somebody might point out something that you didn't see the first time. And so that's why we advise that people don't try to do fact-checking on their own, that it's more of a group effort. Third thing, reach out to the individual or organization that is being fact-checked. We always start with the position that the burden is on the person who's making the claim to provide the evidence to support it. So we always try to make an effort to reach out to the individual or the political organization, or even sometimes people who are posting on social media our Facebook team members will try to reach out to the person who posted it to see if they have anything to support the claim that was being made. And so we always want to start that at the beginning of the process rather than at the end. I can tell you from personal experience, sometimes, like if you wait until the end, they might provide some information that may have you look at the statement in a different light. And so you always want to do that sooner rather than later. Yeah, like I said, it could get clarity on the claim because you don't want to make assumptions about what somebody meant unless you absolutely have to. From my experience, you'll see that sometimes people aren't willing to give you this information. Sometimes people are perfectly willing to support their positions and argue about it. So we always try to make the effort. Another part of our process is to have someone else fact check the work that we're doing. Every fact checker is responsible for making sure that what they're reporting is accurate. Like as far as, like we have a copy editor who goes through and does like typos and grammatical things and that sort of thing. But after every reporter has filed their story and after it's gone through the editing process, there's somebody else on staff who wasn't involved in the reporting or the editing of the article who does the fact checking of the fact checker. And then this is just to ensure that we're being as accurate as possible. And so this is also a part of the process, the collaborative process, where the fact checker who's fact checking the reporter, there's a conversation that you have to make sure that any discrepancies that come up are eliminated before we actually publish the article. And it's just to make sure that we are being accurate, because when your brand is factcheck.org, you don't want to have corrections, because it's a way to establish credibility, is making sure, one, that you're accurate. And so, yeah, if you don't do that, then people lose faith in the work that you're doing. The other thing that we always emphasize is to always provide your sources of information. And depending on what format that you're using, if you're working in print or if you're doing like video work, it's not always easy to let people know the sources that you used to do the fact check. Because on our website, we only publish online. Occasionally, we do videos that are based on the fact checks that we write, and so there's always a link back and forth that people could see. But we either link to that information within the story, or we provide a list, depending on the format of the article that we use, so that people can actually go back and check for themselves what we've reported. Because one of the questions that we always get is who fact checks the fact checkers, and we want the readers to be the ones to fact check us because we're confident in what we're reporting. And so that's why we are always upfront about the sources that we use for the fact checks. This one is use video or audio to verify transcripts. And I usually include this because it's something else that I've experienced. When we're going through the review process of trying to figure out what to fact check, and you're doing it based off of a transcript of what someone said in a TV interview or a debate or a speech that they gave, not every time the transcript is accurate. And so there have been times where people will fact check a statement based on a transcript that was incorrect. They had somebody saying something that they didn't say, or was worded slightly that would change whether or not the information, the ruling would be false or true. And so one of the good things that we do is we rely on rev.com. C-SPAN is also good. They provide videos along with the transcripts so that you can actually match them to make sure that you're checking the accurate information. Because there have also been instances where you might want to fact check a statement that was based on a news article, basically a reporter quoting what someone said or what someone wrote. And if they don't get the quote right, that could lead you to fact check something that didn't need to be fact checked. This is consult experts who can help provide information not available online. And I include this because fact checkers will oftentimes have to write about things that you don't have any particular knowledge about, especially if you're like a general fact checker. Some people have beats that they cover and they're very knowledgeable about it, but if you're sort of new to it and you're covering an issue that's foreign to you, you're going to want to rely on experts who can provide information that isn't like readily accessible online, because when we're doing fact checks, there's not always a database that you can go to and check. Like if we're writing about jobs, we can go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and check those numbers. Or if we're talking about like economic growth, we can go to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. But there are sometimes when we're writing about complex issues where the fact check won't be based on just something that's already accessible online for you to say, you know, this is where this information comes from, and then this disputes what the person said or what they wrote. And so a part of our process is to reach out to people who can provide expertise and knowledge that we wouldn't otherwise have had access to. One of the sites that we use is the Tax Policy Center for issues about taxes. The Kaiser Family Foundation is a reliable source for healthcare information. So those are just the type of some of the type of places that we reach out to. And we always want to include biographical information for the people that we use as sources, as a part of being transparent about why we were using them, because you want to give readers reason to believe that they can have trust in what these individuals are saying. So we always try to reach out to people who are nonpartisan, who don't have any sort of political agenda or bias in the reporting process. And this tip is to don't fact check only one person, organization, or political party. We usually start our process sometimes early in the week by trying to review all of the Sunday political talk shows, all of the weekly press conferences that the members of Congress do during the week. And we make sure that we're covering both Democrats and Republicans. Because one of the things that we have experienced is that sometimes on our website, I think on the homepage, there are probably 10 stories listed at any one time. And what readers will do sometimes is they'll come to our website and they'll try to count up how many fact checks that we have that are based on Democrats and how many are based on Republicans. And they tend to let that persuade them that we're either liberal or conservative in a way. So a part of the fact checking process is you want to make sure that you're like spreading a wide net and you're not just focusing on one person, one political group. And even with like social media claims, sometimes we hear from people that we only fact check social media posts that have like a conservative perspective. But you also want to make sure that you're doing ones that some people could consider liberal as well. The other point that I was making is that you shouldn't also let that deter you from fact checking, like to use Donald Trump as an example, is something that we encountered a lot during 2016 and 2020. It was just a simple fact that Donald Trump made statements that were regularly false, whereas other candidates and politicians weren't doing it as much. And so there was sort of an imbalance that we were writing about him more than other fact checkers, than other politicians or candidates. And so that's just sometimes the nature of the work that you're doing. So you shouldn't let that deter you, or you shouldn't worry that you have like one for a Democrat, one for a Republican. It's sort of just let it fall as it does. You just want to make sure that you're, being even in your review process. And one of the things that we always encounter at factcheck.org is, especially during the midterm election cycles, and even during the presidential races, is we end up fact-checking TV ads a lot. And so I wanted to show one of the TV ads that I wrote about, and just to get your perspective on which claims in this ad did you think you would be able to fact-check and how you would go about fact-checking them.
Whenever Steve Daines has to choose between corporations and Montanans, he puts his corporate donors first. You see, Daines has taken $2 million from corporate PACs and voted for a $1 trillion corporate tax break that puts Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block. Now Daines is pushing a plan that will be another tax windfall for corporations, but experts say could end Social Security benefits by 2023. Steve Daines, putting money before Montana. DSCC is responsible for the content of this ad.
So does anybody want to take a guess at which claims I ended up writing about?
where the quotes were pulled from, whether it was actually reporting from the news or it was like a spokesperson for a different organization?
Yes. Anytime that they include a citation at the bottom of the screen, or you see something in quotes, you want to make sure that they're actually quoting that source accurately. Sometimes you'll find out that they're misquoting them. They're quoting them out of context. And sometimes they're sort of what we consider, there was a project called flagcheck.org that did patterns of deception. And so sometimes it would be sort of misappropriating news sources. And so they were basically saying that this was coming from a source and it didn't match up. So yeah, that would be one of the things that you would look for. There was a claim in this ad about the corporate political contributions that Steve Daines had received. I checked that, and that actually turned out to be accurate. The interesting thing about that is this TV ad was sponsored by the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, and while they were saying that Steve Daines had taken $2 million from corporate PACs, among senators, he was in the middle of the pack, and a lot of the people who had taken more money than him were Democrats. There was also a statement that was made about Steve Daines saying that he supported a policy that would lead to Social Security being bankrupt by, I think it was 2023. And after checking the record and actually talking to his office, you actually found out that he didn't support this at all. So they were completely misrepresenting his position on this particular issue. So those are some of the things that you want to look out for if you're going to be fact-checking some of the political races in your areas.
Is one of the things you look for that context you were talking about? Because the one thing, we do a lot of fact-checking on TV ads, and almost invariably there's a kernel of truth in what they're saying, but when you put it in the broader context, it's not nearly as bad as it sounds, especially like you say, the PAC money. Because you can look at any list and see that, yeah, he took $2 million, but so did most of Congress.
Yes, that's something that we deal with a lot of times. And I think it's just the nature of political TV ads sometimes. There's a short amount of time, and so they're trying to put as much in there as they possibly can. And sometimes they take shortcuts. And so if they aren't expecting the viewers to follow up on what they're actually saying, then it's easy to put something in an ad that could mislead the audience. Did anybody else have any questions?
Have you found trends in TV ads, even post-2020, have changed and become more difficult to look at specific pinpoints? Have you noticed any trends in how campaigns and organizations are putting out their ads and how you fact-check them?
I don't know that I've noticed any trends. One of the things that I was going to get to eventually in the presentation is that we do notice that sometimes across campaigns, the messages will line up very similarly. And so when that happens, we decide that we want to do what's sort of like a thematic piece where we're addressing all of these claims that are about a related issue in one article, so that people who come to that will see that this is a tactic that they're using across a lot of the races. And so it's something that people, in different states can look out for, because campaigns are using this against the candidates in each race. So I guess that's sort of one of the trends that we see in that way. Okay, and these were some tips that I wanted to go over for ways that we sort of consider to make fact-checking more impactful or to be more effective in the actual format and the process that we use. And so the first one is, whenever possible, you want to emphasize the correct information in the headline and the lead of the story or fact-checking article. What we found is that sometimes, based on feedback we've gotten, that people are, when you put the false information out front, even when you're saying that this claim is false, that somehow by repeating the false claim, that is something that people are retaining more so than the actual accurate information. So what we've tried to do more recently is to focus on putting the accurate information in the headline one and also in the very beginning of the story. Because in some formats that you use for fact checking, they'll start with a claim, then it'll be either the verdict or the facts, and it goes in that order. And so we wanted to sort of flip it to go with the accurate information that we want people to remember first, and then we sort of like say that this is based on this false claim that was made, in the hopes that people will retain the accurate information more so than the false claim. And so if you go to our website, you'll notice the formats that we use for the side check. We have a side check COVID-19 fact checking project. And the format that we use for that is that there's a side check digest at the top, and then it goes into a full analysis. And we do something similar for the Facebook pieces, which is a quick take and then a full story analysis. But in that digest or that quick take, we are summarizing the article and we're presenting the correct information first. And so that was something that I just wanted to mention, that when you're writing, you're either doing fact checks or even in your own reporting, that you start with the accurate information. The other thing that we're trying to do is to be more proactive instead of reactive. One of the issues that we have with fact checking is that we're sort of always playing catch up to the false and misleading information that's already out there and spreading, and so we're coming to it sort of late. And so you may have heard the term like pre-bunking, which is basically the general concept is that you want to sort of provide accurate information to your audience that's educating them about a topic in the hopes that if false claims eventually come about, that the accurate information that you've already provided will make it less likely that people will believe the false and misleading claims that are coming up. And so that was one of the goals of the SciCheck COVID-19 vaccination project. So on this page, it says it provides answers to commonly asked questions as well as links to articles debunking information. So you would see things like, how do you know the vaccines are safe? What are the ingredients in the vaccines? How do you know that face masks work? That sort of thing. So you're answering questions that people might have to counter any false claims that may be spread online about these particular practices or treatments. Another thing is to consider doing pieces that educate readers and viewers on what to look out for when reading or watching content online. And I included these two examples. One was like from years ago in 2018, that Ching email your friend sent you is likely bogus, and how to spot fake news. And we've actually done videos to go along with these articles as sort of companion pieces, and they're some of the most watched videos that we have ever produced. But the idea behind this is to provide your audience with some information that they can look out for when they're doing the evaluation process. So one of the things we say was to tell them to consider the source of the information and check the background of the author. Encourage readers to go beyond the headlines, because we know that some people only read the headlines of the first few paragraphs of a story and they don't go beyond that. And so that can really change whether or not you go on to find out accurate information below that point. One of the things we also run into is that a lot of misinformation, people will say that it's intended as satire or was meant as a joke. One of the questions, one of the sites that we get a lot of questions about is the Babylon Bee, which is a satirical website. We get questions about their content consistently, and it's because people don't realize that their information isn't meant to be taken seriously and that it's a joke. And we also encourage them to check their biases so that they're not like discrediting information that they don't already believe or doesn't align with their beliefs, and that they're more open to information that might be from a different perspective.
How do you effectively remind folks to check their biases in their stories? Like, what's an example of how to do it? Because I'm thinking, like, in my stories, you know, I cover politics, and oftentimes it's really hard to tell people, hey man, remember.
I don't know that you necessarily have to do it in each story that you write. This is more of like a general explainer piece where you would like put that on a checklist of things to remind people to be wary of when they're actually looking at content online and when they're listening to people speak and make claims. But you could present information when you're writing your stories that come from their perspective, but then you also want to make sure that you're providing the correct information. And so you're sort of leaving it up to the reader to take that information in. And it won't always work for everybody because some people are just set in the way that they are. But people who are open-minded, I think, would appreciate the balanced approach to that. One of the other things that we do is we write these player guides profiles every election cycle, because one of the things that we wanted to do was to explain to the audience who the organizations are that are behind the political TV ads that they're seeing. And we also did this for the social media websites that we were counting early in our Facebook partnership, where we were putting information online about the websites that we knew were spreading false and misleading content. And so there was a database that people could go to and see, like, if you've encountered information from this group, that you know that this is something that you have to be more skeptical of. And we do the same thing with the political groups that run the TV ads. Yeah, we just want them to think more critically about the information that are coming from these places. And so for the players guide profiles that we do, we always remind people of who the people are that are involved in the organization, how much money they're spending, which candidates they target. And there'll also be a list anytime that we write about a TV ad that we've done a player's guide profile of. We will include that story at the end of the profile so that people will have a list of all the times that we wrote about something that they put out that was either false or misleading. This is what I was mentioning earlier in reference to your point, like writing theme pieces that cover multiple topics, will cover multiple claims, multiple related claims related to a similar topic. Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to be able to respond as quickly as possible to false and misleading information that's spreading online. But a lot of times that isn't possible. And so we found that it's sometimes more effective to write a longer piece that includes multiple claims related to the same topic that people can refer to consistently when these things come up over and over again. And we found that these are some of the most read pieces on our website, the thematic pieces. And I listed 2 examples down here that we did earlier. There were a lot of claims about inflation and what was causing inflation and whether or not it was the president's fault or what were the different factors. Was it Russia? And then I also wrote one about gasoline prices and the reasons that the prices were up. And then we wrote another one about when prices were coming down. And so these pieces look at a bunch of different claims related to a topic in one setting. The other important thing is to provide an outlet for your readers or your viewers to reach out to you and let you know what they are concerned about in fact checking. We started something years ago. It was called Ask Fact Check. It was basically people submitting questions to us that let us know that that there were certain issues that they wanted us to cover or that they were curious about. And that's how we oftentimes knew when something was really viral online, is when we were getting a lot of questions about the same thing from multiple people. And that made us want to write about it even more, because we knew that this was something that people were concerned about. And so once we write that article, we always try to reach back out to that person to let them know that we published the information. And so by doing that, we hope that we are able to get them to not only read the story, but to then share it with hopefully a wider audience, particularly the person who sent them the information in the first place. The other thing that we encourage is that you incorporate the work of reputable fact-checking organizations in the stories that you're working on. because the fact-checking process can take a long time, and if you're a reporter who's like constantly working on deadlines, you may not actually have the time to do an in-depth fact check of your own, but there are fact-checking organizations that are out there that you can rely on to not only make your work more representative, but also to help amplify the fact-checking process, because that's one of the things that, like, fact-checking is important, but we need to find ways to make it more accessible to a wider audience. So we want to amplify the fact checks that we're doing. And so that's why we encourage reporters to use not only factcheck.org, but other fact-checking organizations, so that anytime that you're writing about a claim that somebody made or something or content that you saw online, you want to be able to refer to something that's already been fact-checked. And Google has this tool, the Fact Check Explorer, where you can actually go in and type in and search based on subjects of fact checks that have already been produced. And I think they actually have fact checks from different countries as well. So that's a tool that you could use to search out anytime you're doing a story. And this is just basically letting you know that we are working on the 2022 midterm elections. And so it's always been the case that we focus on the Senate races that are the most competitive, which is probably the races in each of your states. We're currently working on Ohio, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin. So there are a couple that we're focusing on. We're also going to focus on some of the major House races, especially when we notice different themes that are coming up in those races that we want to pay attention to. And then our Facebook team is constantly monitoring social media content that is false and misleading claims about either the election process itself, claims of election fraud or election irregularities, but also claims that affect the individual races. So yeah, that's just an overview of where we are in our process and where we're headed. So look forward to any questions you might have later on. But I want to let Matt get to his part of the presentation first.
Yeah, maybe what we'll do is we'll do a round of applause. We'll have Matt go and then we'll open up for Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, who's seen a deepfake before? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, so we have about half or so. And did you know the person in the deepfake as a celebrity, a politician, or something like that? Raise your hand. Did. Okay. And would you say, how did you know it was a deepfake or faked in some way? One person gave an example how they know. Because it was badly done. That's a really good reason. And in fact, a lot of those are badly done. So I'm going to talk about deepfake detection. And I'm super excited to talk to you all, local reporters, particularly because you're the front lines when it comes to the information that a lot of people receive. And also, my younger brother happens to be in Milwaukee, and he's a local reporter. And so we get to talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And so he must work with you, Matt. And his name's James Groh. So first, I'm going to introduce this topic with a video from someone we all know.
He's going to introduce to you the wonderful world of deepfakes, how AI and VFX are unlocking the future of our imagination.
Okay, so we knew that person, and that one probably wasn't that bad a deepfake. It looked like Tom Cruise. It wasn't Tom Cruise introducing the presentation today. And what was going on there is we had a deepfake technology paired with a visual effects artist who's very, very good, similar to the people in Hollywood who create, Fast and Furious movies where the actor has actually died, but we want to keep watching the same guy because it's a really fun and compelling story. So that same kind of thing. And I'm going to come back to the Tom Cruise deepfake and explain that a little bit more. But something that's really important to frame the discussion of deepfakes and frame the discussion of information and misinformation, disinformation online is a New Yorker cartoon from the 90s. And the tagline is, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And nowadays, you can click a button and generate a face. This is a small little face on this image. on websites like thispersondoesnotexist.com. You can keep generating faces over faces that look essentially like LinkedIn profile photos and actually look quite convincing oftentimes. So this is what the evolution in the last 8 years has looked like, from really grainy synthetic images of people's faces to last year something quite realistic with details in the hair, the teeth, and even in the last couple of years, this stuff was pretty realistic. And this is one particular example of synthetic media, people's faces, portrait shots that can be done. And one thing to keep in mind is that faces are highly structured. Most people have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, cheeks in similar ways, and the way people differ from each other can actually be represented mathematically. And then we can do stuff like face swapping, we can manipulate faces, we can move facial landmarks. Facial landmarks are points on the face like the corner of your eye or part of your nose to make someone say or do something they haven't said. And I highlight that because deep fakes are not actually even images, and we're going to get into the videos, but deepfakes are focused on faces. That's not to say that there's not misinformation and synthetic media around anything, like just making someone, well, I'll show you more examples. Making someone look like this, Jefflon Zuckergates, who is a combo of 3 different people and is prompted by this text on the right. So the prompt is in a product called Stable Diffusion. Stable Diffusion came out a couple weeks ago. And what it is it's a paint by text model, or a diffusion model is the technical term for it. And what you can do with it is you put in a text prompt, you say whatever you want to create, and it will generally create that thing that you want to do. So it turns out that there's some artistry or engineering around how to do that prompt. So you can't just say Jeff Bezos plus Bill Gates plus Mark Zuckerberg. You want to add in a bunch of extra details, but by adding in those details, like sharp focus, Nikon D3300, that kind of stuff, you can actually get this really high resolution fake generated via an algorithm. And you can do this kind of thing with DALL-E. DALL-E is made by OpenAI. It's another company. It's a company similar to Facebook and Google, but it's much smaller, but it does the same kind of AI-like stuff. They focus on a lot of generative models. So they'll have generative text models that can write stories. They have generative models that create images. This is a prompt that I created. And this prompt says, portrait of a television reporter with brown hair, intricate, highly detailed, smooth, sharp focus photograph. And that's what you get. You can actually erase a portion of it and then just add something else. So with just a couple seconds of work, I can add glasses or I can make her smile. In fact, this one doesn't look as realistic, and it turns out that because DALL-E is run by a company, as opposed to Stable Diffusion, which is just open sourced online and available for anyone who downloads it, they have an API that interacts between the model and the user. And by having that API, they can actually limit features. And so one of the things that they limit is the resolution and fidelity of the faces. And the reason they do that is to limit the potential for misinformation. With Stable Diffusion, now you can have actually a lot of images generated of people, mostly people who don't necessarily exist, or maybe their doppelgangers exist, but it's not intentionally of that person. But sometimes a celebrity or politician, somebody who has many, many images online, can be readily producible, and you can have them do lots of things. And the nasty thing that someone might do is have someone burn books, and then people will say, oh my God, I can't believe that person did this thing. That's one example of maybe a bad thing you could do. You could imagine many different kind of things. But this is an example, those are examples of synthetic media. And those are examples of computer-generated synthetic media. This is an example of human-generated synthetic media. And it's kind of to show that this has been around for a while. So in the middle, on the left, is Stalin. And on his left, and on the right in the photograph, is his water commissar. When the water commissar was no longer of use to him, he erased him from history, hired an artist, and the artist drew in this portion of the image. And it was as if he could rewrite history. Now, some people can fall for that. Not everyone does. One of the things that I should mention is I'm optimistic about this because people can think critically. Especially professionals in the media think about this all the time and can think critically. And so being able to convey this to large audience, how to think about what can and can't happen, is going to be super, super useful. When it comes to the AI-generated stuff, it's AI-generated, but it's human-guided most of the time. And so this kind of picture requires someone being thoughtful. Now that we have one of these, it's much easier to copy and paste, throw 3 new people, and have this kind of thing. And there's many other examples of what you might post. This one just has the humor aspect, but also the like really creepy, scary aspect, so that's why I want to share it. But really, synthetic media can be in 4 different kind of categories, the different modalities of this world, at least in like a communication space. And I was just showing you a bunch of images. Generally speaking, we don't call those deepfakes. People might say a deepfake image, and deepfake is a term of art itself, and really a term that's been around since 2017, since late 2017. It was on a Reddit forum, and somebody created videos where they did face swapping and put someone's head on someone else's body. That's where the term deepfakes came from. And the idea behind this deepfakes thing is that it's a fake generated by a machine learning model. That machine learning model is using a deep neural network. And so we call it a deep fake. And deep has actually been an adjective that describes much of the recent kind of new technology in machine learning. We say deep learning, and it's because it's using neural networks. So that's just to give you a little background on what this term is. And so when we say deep fakes, we really mean video. Though people will say deep fake audio, they'll say deep fake images. You could even say deep fake text. But it starts to lose its meaning. And so I just want to kind of clarify that usually when we're talking about deepfakes, we're probably going to be talking about video, though all these things are connected. So just to get into Tom Cruise a little bit more. Go on for about 30 more seconds. And it's kind of giving you a sense of what the actor looks like. This is both 2 Tom Cruises, but you're seeing essentially the masking that's happened. And it's not masking his entire body. There's an actor there. You can see the actor on the left looks slightly different than Tom Cruise, doesn't have one of the dimples, isn't as good looking as Tom Cruise, has maybe a little bit more stubble.
I think there's bubblegum inside there. That's incredible. How come nobody ever told me there's bubblegum? Incredible.
So once again, that's a deep fake, but it's a deep fake that uses the face swapping technology and combines it with a really good visual effects artist. And as you're seeing there, you saw some of the masking that was happening. So what we want to do if we're trying to produce a deep fake is we mask the face and then we swap it out with someone else's face. In this case, what the visual effects artist did was he found a lookalike. And that lookalike had a similar hairstyle, had similar skin color as him on the neck, and then they're able, and actually was really good at doing the Tom Cruise voice, because that's actually just done by a human in this particular video. And I should say, the reason I point all that out is because deepfakes are not actually that good. A lot of times deepfakes are quite bad, but when you pair deepfakes with someone who wants to put a lot of time and effort into something, it can become quite good. And also, if you create a deepfake, understanding the right context, where the things that are easy to spot are and where the hard ones are, maybe you'll make one such that it's kind of hard to spot. So context will be really important. There's a couple different kinds of deepfakes. I won't go into the technical details, the different kind of models to do this, but I'll give you the high-level overview of what they look like. So we looked at a face-swapping deepfake, and that's where you basically take the yellow portion, and this is Jennifer Lawrence's body, but then with Steve Buscemi's head superimposed. And you can watch these kind of videos on YouTube. But you can also do something called head puppetry. And so you can take a single image of in this case, Vladimir Putin, but you could do it for anyone and just move their facial landmarks. So it's really, really easy to identify the eyes and the nose and whatnot with a couple lines of code and then move them around, or just do that as an artist with a bunch of different tools and then start to make them say something, or at least move their face to appear that way. And another version is lip syncing. So you actually take a regular video, in this case it would be Mark Zuckerberg, and the only thing you manipulate is his lips. So maybe it's a video of him giving a speech previously, and then what you do is you put a bounding box over his lips, and then you add new lips in, and basically it's a model that moves the lips in accordance with the phonemes associated with the words you want him to say. And then you can have an algorithm to try to generate the voice. Usually the algorithm's not perfect. There are ways to make the algorithm quite good in an end-to-end setting, but often you'll have voice actors, or you'll have voice actors with some auto-tuning, some experts in the background. Sometimes you can do voice-to-voice transfer. So you have one person speaking who's quite similar, and then the model can get it to like the perfect voice if you have lots of samples of someone like Mark Zuckerberg. If you haven't spoken much, it's much harder to make a deep fake of you. If you don't have many images or videos of you online, it's much harder to make a deep fake of you. Probably for most people in this room, it's a little bit easier to make deep fakes of you because probably there's lots of images and video and audio online. Maybe the ultimate test for deep fake technology, and it's definitely not there yet, but it could be there in the not too distant future, is making a deep fake of anyone. So it would be really good if you could make a deep fake of yourself, and then you maybe couldn't even know if you had said that thing or not. Because sometimes our memory is not so good, and it's like, maybe it's a deep fake of you, and you're like, oh, did I actually say that? If you could get to that level, that would be, we're at like perfect deep fake zone. We're not there yet, and that's something that's good. But even if we do get there, I think there's a lot of ways that we can fight against that. But this gives you a sense of just the high level, what kind of manipulations generally occur. So I'm going to show you another video, and this one's from TikTok.
Artificial intelligence replace the role of visual effects artists? It already has.
I'm not real. Kurt Skeleton is a fake character I made using multiple AI-powered programs, and here's how I did it. His face was created using the first release of DALL-E. I played around using different prompts until I created the perfect look. I didn't want to make him look hot because I wanted people to follow him for his jokes and visual effects. So it hurt me to do it, but I had to make him look really funny looking and ugly. I rendered out hundreds of these photos and fed them into an AI-powered program called Convert Skeleton to generate a full 3D model based off these pictures, which is where I got the idea for his name. Honestly surprised no one caught that. Now all I have to do is record my video, send that clip to deepmotion.com, which uses AI to motion capture my movements, then apply that animation to the Kurt Skeleton model. For the facial expressions, I use Deepfake Lab, again using those images from the DALL-E renders. His voice is the only part that isn't AI. Since the program that I want respeecher costs too much, I just deepen my voice like this and put a ton of effects and modulation to make it sound like Kurt Skeleton. So be sure to follow my actual account down below and comment what you guys think. Should I keep posting this account as Kurt Skeleton, or is the experiment over now?
Seemed kind of real, right? Kind of crazy. So that one is not a deep fake. And this is where it gets really, really tricky, what happens online. And now, of course, he's not really trying to convince you of any political thing. This is just some random TikTok video online. But it gets kind of hard to know what's real and what's not. Turns out that this is a guy online who does visual effects. And it can really go viral if you talk about something that is a deep fake, that's actually not a deep fake, but looks like a deep fake, shows the advances of technology. And I know that was kind of complicated, but that's kind of what he wants to do. He wants to spin your head, go really fast, activate emotions, and then you wonder what's really going on. So one of the cool things is someone like D'Angelo might do fact checking on that, and if you looked at the technology that he used, you'd see, yes, a couple of the things that he mentioned were real, but one of them was certainly not real. If you just looked at his profile, you'd see he just has a lot of visual effects videos, and this is kind of his jam. But the reason I bring this up is because it's really hard to, with no context, have a sense of, is this video real or fake? Or, you know, when they kind of did that transfer, is that a deep fake? And what is a deep fake? Once again, I defined it as an algorithm generating some kind of thing that makes someone do or say something they don't believe. But at the end of the day, that's me as an academic saying, here's this thing. What matters is what's in the real world and what are people interacting with. And it doesn't really matter if an algorithm generated or a human generated kind of thing. So I just bring this up because it just adds some complications to what are these things, and helps also maybe reveal what people's attention gets attracted to online. And people are very curious about what the future of this technology is. And anyone who can take a step out before everyone else sometimes tries to do that and then gets attention for doing such a thing. And so one thing that happened on Twitter earlier this summer is someone was saying saying that in the DALL-E and the Stable Diffusion models, they're speaking a secret language. And it sounds like kind of cool to find AI speaking a secret language. There's no evidence that AI is speaking a secret language, but it's a pretty amazing claim. And if that was true, it would be big. And so sometimes people want to be the first person to see that, and then people want to believe it because it sounds exciting. And so we get into dangerous stuff about people wanting to believe stuff versus what the truth is, and then we just have to dig in, pay attention, and think about whether something's accurate or not. So a paper that I recently wrote was about deepfake detection and how we should do content moderation on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok. Should we have algorithms try to detect whether something's real or fake? Should we have people do it, content moderators? Can we have just the users through wisdom of the crowd? And the idea there was there's a competition, and basically that competition had videos like the screenshot you see here. I'll show you what one of these videos look like if it pops up.
We'll go with something that I have in mind for the future changes.
So this is a video, it doesn't really matter what she's saying. That's 10 seconds long. That shows a unknown actor, unknown actress, in a nondescript place saying an uncontroversial thing. And there's 100,000 plus videos just like that. So it's videos that have deepfake manipulations that are only visual manipulations. There's no audio manipulations, and there's no kind of persuasive content other than the change in some kind of things. From your distance, you probably can't see where the fake was. There's a little bit of change to her eyes and her cheeks. In this case, it's like, well, what was the point? And the point is more, can you just spot the difference? But the question is, can the algorithm do that? They hosted a contest for this with $1 million in prize money, 2,000 teams submitted models. The best model, and this was run by Facebook and Microsoft through an organization called Partnership on AI, the best model was 65% accurate. So the models are not that accurate at identifying deepfakes, even deepfakes that are, it's just the visual side of things, let alone all the other stuff. So then we were curious, well, what would happen if we did it with people? And we found that people are actually not that bad. And there we go. And so I'll give you a couple things that people can look at when they're just doing the visual side of things. So one is paying attention to the face, because by definition, deepfakes are manipulations to the face, like the 3 that I showed. That doesn't mean that you can't also manipulate backgrounds and stuff. And certainly with the new synthetic image models, you can do a lot of manipulations with backgrounds. And in the future, there will be more of this context-oriented stuff where you can move people's hands around. But today, that's not really the case. And so looking for incongruencies, like does the skin age look like the hair and eye age? Or like does the text have some kind of typo, like incongruency should have an IE? And just seeing like things that don't make sense. Like do shadows appear? So like usually shadows and kind of the laws of physics aren't always obeyed by the fake. But that doesn't mean that people intuitively see those kind of things, but as a fact checker or someone who's going to pay a lot of attention to something, that's something that you might look for and that you might be able to spot. Glare in the glasses at certain angles, just something to think about. And the other thing that I want to point out is this is what exists today. So for today's technology, for this upcoming election, a lot of times you can say, this video, like there's something kind of funky about it. Maybe it's like low resolution. You're like, I'm not sure if that source is like right or whatever. okay, like it's not necessarily a deep fake, it might be a deep fake, but like the technology is not perfect to get to that Tom Cruise deep fake level where you're gonna see that in like many like areas, unless someone puts a lot of time into it. And so you have to ask yourself, why might someone put a lot of time into it? If they're just putting a little bit of time into it, then you're in this kind of neat spot of, well, the person was really far back in the video. This seems like maybe an easy to like create deep fake. Maybe I'll like increase my likelihood of believing this is a deep fake and double check. Or maybe like the person's, there's 3 people, they're constantly like moving around, putting their hands like that. Then you're like, oh, well, that would be really hard to deep fake because fingers and hands and movement are actually much more difficult to do things. Unless, of course, you see little like blurs across the screen when different things happen. So there's lots of like things to think about, and there's no like one thing, or I can't really give you a list of 10 other than saying there's all these things that are interconnected, and it's something that we want to think about. But people were actually quite good. So people were better at the algorithm, 80% on average. And it kind of depends on what stimulus set we looked at, but we looked at like 169 different videos from this set of 100,000 plus. And that's something that gives us hope, because that's just for the visual side of things. And once you add in all the reasoning components, then there's more kind of room for people to be critical and think about this. But in the context to be aware of, I guess I kind of just said some of these, but just to kind of put them up on the screen in case anyone wants to take a photo or whatnot, you can think about not just the visual side of things, but would this person sound like that? Do they speak this language? Why would they say that? Is there any reason anyone would want to create a fake in this scenario? And just like the classic thing that all journalists like think about is, how reliable is the source? So the same kind of stuff that you'd want to think about if someone's lying or not, you also want to think about in a video, because videos maybe are faked, but oftentimes not. Actually, deep fakes are less than like 0.1% of videos online. So it's actually not a common thing, but certainly it could be a dangerous thing. And there was a deep fake of Zelensky back in March saying that he would like to lay down his arms, stop the war, declare victory for Russia. And turns out it was a really bad deep fake. And then also the thing is, the politician can just come on 10 minutes later and say, that wasn't me. So there are like great ways, at least in certain circumstances, to kind of get out of the negative grips of some of the things. 2 things I want to mention about some of these deepfakes are, on the right, just because this is a little bigger and it's closer to me, is a picture of the ears of Tom Cruise on the left and Tom Cruise deepfake on the right. This isn't going to be the case in every single video, but it turns out that when you do face swapping, you're only swapping the face. Well, they left the ears of the regular guy, of the lookalike on, and it turns out that he has unattached earlobes, but Tom Cruise has attached earlobes. And so this is one particular signature or artifact that really makes it clear that this is a deep fake. And once again, it's not going to happen every time, but it's one of the ways that we might be able to do that, and forensic people might be able to do that. Another way is looking at someone's head gestures or someone's specific signature movements. So when Obama says, "Hey, everybody," he always raises his head and lowers his head like that. Turns out that in the deep fakes, they often would have Obama saying, "Hey, everybody," because that's his signature saying, but they didn't do the movement in the same way that he did it. So different kind of ways to identify those things. And I want to show you one last deepfake.
Democracy is a fragile thing, more fragile than you want to believe. If the election fails.
Anyone want to mention things that look like it might be a deepfake?
It seemed like the face was almost in like a higher quality than the rest of the image.
Yes, that's one thing, yeah.
I have never heard him speak English.
That's another great point. Yeah, exactly. So there's like a bunch of different things that we can use, and like often the machine learning models, the algorithms, are trained on a bunch of deepfake videos, but they aren't trained on knowledge about the world. So like knowledge about whether a particular person, even a really famous person, speaks English or not is generally not there, and that's where we want critical thinking and like human kind of ability to look at all the different contexts to come in and be able to think about this kind of stuff. And absolutely, like it's kind of like bokeh in the background kind of, and they actually, he was moving his hands, and so they have an actor here, but this looks kind of like a fake shirt or whatever, and just the way the neck comes, there is something like kind of weird about that. But I want to share what the model thought. So this was the model that won this competition, got $500,000 because the winner didn't take all, they just took half, and then second place, whatever, took some. But leading model was confident that it was not a deepfake. Sorry, that, 2% likelihood that it's a deepfake means it's confident that it's not a deepfake. And then more than half of people predict that it's a deepfake. Not so many people predict it's a deepfake. I wish there was more. This is the people we pay online to participate, and then 10,000 more people who just come to our website because they're interested in misinformation and curious about how they would do in this kind of task. But what happens when we give that machine learning prediction to people and ask, do they want to adjust their answer? We see that actually then only 22% of people predict that it's more likely a deepfake than not. And so the reason I bring that up is when you provide an explanation and that explanation is wrong, even though people should know that machine learning models are not always right and that the machine learning model only had access to the visual components, people might have the wrong intuition. Or since they're not sure, they're like, well, someone else or an AI said this, they might adapt their answer. And so this is just another point of contact that we want to be careful about, is not just kind of giving it all away to what the AI says. So 3 takeaways that I hope to leave you with is, 1, a sense of what human-guided AI can generate today. I talked about the images and the video. It also can do text. But now you have a sense of the perceptual side of things, also how bad it can, well, you didn't see exactly how bad it was, but you saw how good it was. You see what perceptual artifacts are left behind, some of the kind of background images, the biometric ear component, and then thinking about this kind of context. And so when we think about this idea of seeing as believing, maybe if people see stuff, they're more likely to believe things than if they just read about it. That could be true. Our research shows that when we show political speeches and we give the transcript versus a real video, or the transcript of a fake video versus the fake video, people are actually quite good at identifying, like they have intuition about the perceptual artifacts. It's hard to spot a lie, but when you also have ability to look at perceptual side of things, it's a little bit easier. And we looked at this on deepfakes that were actually kind of good. And the end of this phrase, seeing as believing, turns out it's like there's a second half, and it's but feeling is the truth. And it's not about going with your emotions, but it's about experiences of the world. And it's not just about seeing, but it's sensing everything. And by sensing everything, reasoning about it, we can come to better grips with things. So I want to leave you with this comic, and I'll read it out. So it's from XKCD, and they say, thanks to deepfakes, soon we won't know what's real anymore. Video will become meaningless. I don't know. We had Photoshop for decades and staged photos for centuries. It hasn't made photos meaningless. The bottleneck for fake stuff isn't technical. The bottleneck is willingness to lie. People lying is a very old problem. It's a known exploit. I guess technically, we've been able to make text deepfakes for 5,000 years. And then this is a reference to a meme. Maybe E.A. Nasser's copper ingots were actually fine. And that's like the oldest kind of like known text to man, and it's actually a complaint about some fake copper that some guy bought. So that's the story that I wanted to share with you, and open it up to questions for D'Angelo and me.
Political misinformation, is it pretty rare still?
Yeah, so I would say it's like less than 1%, or less than like 1/10 or 100th of a percent online. There is a campaign last year against Matt Gaetz in Florida, where one of the representatives or person running for Congress used a deepfake, but he didn't use a deepfake to mislead. He used a deepfake to show how a deepfake could mislead. And so there's all these ways that people play and just go around the corner, so it's not But I haven't seen in American politics someone create a deep fake where they're seriously trying to convince people it was real and then try to advertise with political money. But yeah, it exists all the time. On Wikipedia, you'll find that like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un videos are there, but they're kind of as examples. And there's Obama videos, but no, in terms of people being convinced today or people using this to persuade, it's not that used.
And as technology advances, the potential is there in the not too distant future.
That's right.
So are we doing?
So I'm actually really optimistic about it because we aren't doomed about lying. People lie all the time, and then we just think about, well, why would you be lying? What are your sources? How else can I come to the truth? And we haven't even relied on video for that long. And even in like legal instances, just having a video of something isn't enough to prove someone guilty. You have to show that that video came from a particular source, that like it hasn't been tampered with, and all those kind of things. So I'm not so worried about it, but it is something that we have to be cognizant about and now have to deal with, and we can't just like kind of go on autopilot.
Are there any laws that anyone has looked at or passed to deal with this, or is it a freedom of expression protected activity? Has anyone gone down that?
So I'm not sure exactly about that because I think there are laws. I'm not sure if they're specifically about deepfakes, but certainly one of the uses of deepfakes is not for politics, but it's for pornography. And those are taken off like big internet websites almost immediately. So Reddit will not let anyone host anything like that. And I think it's just because it's like a line in the sand that you just don't want to interact with. But I'm sure people must be working on this kind of stuff. But I'm not aware of laws yet that are specifically targeted for whether you can manipulate someone to say something and post it. Yeah.
D'Angelo, you mentioned not wanting to elevate misinformation that might otherwise fly under the radar. I imagine there are some difficult calls. I'm wondering if you can give an example of a claim that you decided not to fact check, and then maybe one where you decided to fact check it.
That's hard off the top of my head. I have to think about it and get back to you.
What kind of criteria would you use to make a decision like that?
Well, usually it's based on how viral the content is. If it's something that we're seeing either being posted by a large number of accounts with a smaller number of followers, or if it's coming from like one account with a huge following, are two factors where we go after social media content. And then with politicians is usually in what type of setting do they present the information. Like if it's a State of the Union address, that's definitely something that's being seen by a lot of people, so we want to address claims a little bit there. If it's something that, like a press release that was sent out to a small email list, and if that's the only time that that claim was mentioned, that might be something that we wouldn't necessarily pay a lot of attention to. Like the TV ads that we write about a lot are because they are constantly on TV, and there's a large audience that they're being seen by, and so those are the ones that we want to focus on. Yeah, so usually if it's an outlet where we feel like it's going to reach a lot of people, or a lot of people have already seen it, we want to counter it, and so that's how we go after it. Yeah.
I have a question, well, I have several, for D'Angelo, but you said that they're all about the process. The third step is to like reach out to the individual or the organization, and you said sometimes they might not want to provide evidence. Is that a red flag if they don't want to?
Yes, we usually take that as a red flag.
Okay.
Because usually in our experience we find that people who have at least a little bit of information to support the claim they made, even if it was ultimately ruled to be false or misleading or out of context or whatever the case may be, if somebody is completely unwilling to defend the statement they made, that's usually telling us that there isn't anything to support this. So yeah, that's something that we definitely take into consideration.
What do you guys do with the fakes that don't check out? Well, I guess it's kind of different because you're not writing an article like. Never mind that question. I figured it out.
Let's take one last question, and then we'll take a 10-minute break so we can get started with the next one.
So I have a question in terms of ratings, or labeling them as misleading or out of context. Like, is that the preference to create like a rating system versus just like putting the statement in the story and then just like coming with the fact check without just us like telling them 3 Pinocchios or whatever?
So factcheck.org actually doesn't do a rating system. We think it's more effective, well, one, because we only focus on false and misleading claims. So we don't have to go from true to whatever else, maybe on the opposite, whatever term you're going to come up for. But we think it's more effective to just say this is the claim and it's either false or it's misleading and this is why, and provide that explanation rather than trying to come up with a particular rating system that might apply in each case where you have to come to a consensus about how many Pinocchios you're going to give it or how it falls in that rating system. One, we think it's more effective to just be direct, but also it sort of becomes complicated to apply the rating system to each fact check that you're doing because they're not always the same. So we just think it's simpler.